All right, guys. I know it's the middle of the day. It's lunchtime, but I appreciate you guys hopping on. My name is Jason Hyman. I am the owner of the office of Jason T. Hyman, that we're a brokerage and planning firm, but I am also the founder and business development officer for the Third Ward Real Estate Council. If you guys aren't familiar with the Real Estate Council, and I'm sorry, I'm admitting people here today. I lost my producer. If you aren't familiar with the Thurman Real Estate Council, essentially we're a group of neighbors and professionals here in Houston that banded together to really specifically manage a lot of the things going on in our neighborhood, specifically around real estate. So we really focus in on real estate, community development through real estate. We support the local developers. I mean, we do that a little bit differently because our ecosystem isn't just developers. It consists of essentially the entire community. So that's other real estate professionals that support developers, as well as the neighbors and stakeholders that give the feedback and will end up using those spaces that we create. So try to have a good, well-rounded approach to what we do. Now, back in November, we had our luncheon, and we kicked off this conversation around connecting corridors, early on to this discussion of development. How does it really connect to the revitalization of communities, especially like those here in Third Ward?
Mhm.
So we talked a little bit about what that looks like for us, some of the gaps and things we have to look out for, and how to start charting a path forward. So we decided to follow up on this conversation again, um, but from a different angle. And we're going to continue having this conversation, continue educating ourselves so that those here on the call, we can all kind of pitch in and help for some strategic efforts. And so I've asked some specific guests here today. I appreciate you guys taking the time. I have Nikki Knight, the program manager for the Southeast Management District. Nikki is very integral to this conversation just as much as she is to what's happening in the district. So that's the Third Ward area and the surrounding area here in Houston, this Southeast region. You look on the map, it kind of looks like a triangle in a sense if you had it outlined. She's been very responsible and key in a lot of the economic activity that you see and don't see. So with the businesses, with how things look, feel, and happen here in this particular part of town. And so I asked her to hop on because she has a unique perspective, being able to support that type of development, the economic growth in the area, as well as her background and kind of being around HERS funding and different management districts here in Houston. And so, Nikki, if you could, before I introduce Jason and Atif, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you agreed to hop on the call.
Well, Jason, I am currently the program manager for the Greater Southeast Management District. And I decided to hop on this call and to participate in this discussion because it is a necessary and viable response to the needs in the area. I'm personally committed to the work of building our city. I'm a native Houstonian, but I also think that it's time. I think it's time for us to get creative in how communities are built, how communities are sustained, and really take a look at who's responsible for making sure we add value to our own spaces. So it's a personal conversation, but it's also one that intersects preference, policy, people. And I think that it's important for us to have these roundtables, to have these conversations, to educate ourselves on what is available from both development side, economic development, and business retention and stabilization. But I also know that it takes people who are committed to the long-term viability of an area to stay connected, to stay verbal about the needs, and to really work together to get the assets in place to make the community better. So I'm committed because it's personal.
Okay. Thank you. Jason Grant, I have here on the line. Jason is pretty new to Houston and probably still figuring out all of our different loops and freeways here, but not new to development or supporting developers, quite like he's doing right now with the program manager of LISC Houston. I met Jason last year participating in the Seed Academy, where he oversaw and coordinated a program to help train developers here in Houston on, how to build affordable housing, multifamily housing. Jason, thank you for hopping on. If you could give us a little bit of your background, and why you chose to hop on the call today as well.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I'm like Jason said, I'm new to Houston. I've been here about 2 years, but not new at affordable housing. So I started off working in this space in New York City. So a long time ago, I was actually an actor and was looking for a flexible job. So I got into real estate, I got my license, and I was fortunate enough to work on a mixed-use development in Harlem and the affordable portion of the mixed-use development. So there was a 421A tax abatement that developed, and in order to, sorry, somebody needs to probably mute themselves. And in order to get the tax abatement, you had to allocate 20% of your development for low to moderate income, so workforce housing, so between 80% and 120% of AMI. And that housing is sold through a lottery process that's in conjunction with the city of New York, their housing department, which is called HPD, state of New York. And so we did well in that project. And then I got a chance to be the director of sales for the next development, for the affordable portion of the next development for that same developer. It's a well-known Black developer called BRP Companies. And then from that, became really knowledgeable about the lottery process and got a chance to be a consultant for one of their projects in Brooklyn. From that, then I got an opportunity to work for a nonprofit developer. And we had an allocation of 180 homes that we purchased through a credit facility. And we renovated those homes and resold them to low to moderate income New Yorkers, also through a lottery process. And LISC, New York, or LISC was a part of that credit facility. And so that was my first introduction to LISC. And in doing that work, was able to help a lot of moderate income families, mostly people of color, generate wealth. And so they were able to purchase homes with a subsidy, but that subsidy expires after 15 years. And a lot of those homes have since close to double in value. So it was really rewarding to help people create generational wealth. And long after I left that position, people would get in touch with me and thank me for helping them walk through that process, or helping them take advantage of that opportunity. And so I went back to school, got my MBA, and then when I was doing in other industries, and when I moved back to Houston, was happy to get the opportunity to get back into this work and work with LISC. And so one of my missions now is to there's a affordable housing, and the dire need for affordable housing is newer to Houston. I've done a lot, worked with a lot of developers, helped a lot of people in New York. So I think there are a lot of best practices that we can bring here. And so I'm just excited to see what opportunities are here and how it can help people connect the dots. And LISC being a community development financial institution, we're really in a position we had to help developers of color, which is what I do with Seed. So when Jason reached out to me, it's always a no-brainer to talk about what LISC does and see how it can help people.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
And then Atif Qadir.
That's it.
Now, Atif, we met almost a year ago. I feel like, you really can help bridge this conversation. You have a very unique perspective, being a registered architect, having a background as a developer, and then as well as our time, just you explaining in your perspective around financing and filling the different financing, being creative and filling that capital stack. And you've done a lot of work in helping developers with founding Redist, right? Mm-hmm. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, and again, why'd you choose to hop on this call and talk about this today?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all. So I'm an architect that has subsequently done a lot of things not traditionally related with architecture, but I would say For me, the central theme for a lot of my career is, I think, an echo to what Jason and Nikki very eloquently talked about, is housing and community development, and how that is a cornerstone to the way that cities grow and improve. Namely, currently what I do is I'm a real estate developer in Hoboken, New Jersey, where I live. So I focus on historic redevelopment projects, and a lot of the terms like the concepts that we'll be talking about in terms of downtown revitalization and use of alternate sources of financing to really realize the projects that we're interested in, is absolutely what the case here in Hoboken and neighboring cities like Jersey City and Newark as well. And then in addition, in the context where Jason and I know each other, I started a technology company called Redisc. So it's a venture-backed company. And essentially what we've done is gathered data related to economic development incentives. So that's things like tax credits, rebates, low interest financing, and other forms of helping fill a capital stack, particularly for emerging developers. So my team of 6 based in New York, we did that for 18 states. And now I'm really excited to be in the process of actually selling the company to a national consulting company. So I think that hopefully will be my first win in the win column. And I'll be happy to share with all you guys how to make that across. Because from like what we do in like real estate PE, there's a whole kind of set of characters that you deal with. But then in venture capital, even in the same context of real estate, there's a whole other cast of characters that we deal with. And the issues of social equity and racial equity on one side, you're probably not surprised, completely mirrored on the other one.
No, I'm rooting for you. I think that's amazing that you've created a marketplace for us to be able to go and find, more funding. And I think, to have all you three on the call, that essentially is, why I asked you guys to hop on with us today. And so, all of us is just like you guys said, all of us on the call on this call because we really care about the places that we live, and we're taking more of a firsthand approach at, changing how they actually look and feel to us and how they're used. And so there's some advocacy there, and then there's some action. I kind of want to touch on both. We have the folks here on the call today, but then we have our, supporting members in our audience that'll see this afterwards. Um, I want to anchor the conversation a little bit in terms of like why we're even talking about corridors. You know, you mentioned, Atif, you mentioned downtown revitalization, and so
Mhm.
for us, we're focused in on Third Ward as a kind of model or playground to create models in a sense. And
Mhm.
emancipation is one of our main corridors, and it sits um, maybe it's what, Nikki, you probably can correct me, maybe it's a little bit more than a mile or so in our area that sits with a lot of scattered sites and things like that. Meanwhile, the rest of the area is quickly gentrifying, right? So, what are you guys' perspective on the role that the commercial corridor actually plays in revitalization? Nikki, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think it's almost the artery, right? For the entire community. A thriving commercial corridor sets the tone for the area. It has a ripple effect of sorts. So if you have a viable commercial corridor that is producing spaces and attracting people to that corridor for for work, for leisure, for necessity, it becomes an artery for the community because they can't do without it. Um, if you don't have a commercial corridor, if you don't have a primary space for people to gather and to convene, then you end up with scattered places and people taking their resources outside of the very community you're attempting to build. So it's critical. It literally is the central artery for any community to be able to thrive.
It's that local economic base that I feel like we're reverting back to here in the country
Mhm.
of like Main Street
Absolutely.
and things like that. Uh, just excuse me, Atif. One of the things that reasons I reached out is because I was thinking about, who else can really add some insight to this conversation? And I was banging my head and I was banging my head. And I went on LinkedIn not to look for anybody. And the first name I saw was yours. And so I touched the name. And the first thing I saw was your pinned article where you're talking about, hey, here's the ways to actually have a thriving Main Street or corridor. And you had
Mhm.
some advice there. And I said, that's it. I need to. And I reached out immediately. So, from your perspective, what role do you see the corridors playing in that revitalization? Why is that important?
Yeah, I think I want to take one step in a direction towards some financial nerdery, based on what Nikki said, because I think the what she said is the spirit and the idea, and I agree with that completely. And the way that I think about what does that mean to a city's budget, is kind of threefold, and that's why this concept is so important. I think the first one is the ability to have a viable commercial corridor means that there's going to be retail and commercial revenue that can drive a diversified tax base. And one of the hardest things in, say, a city like New York City that's seen a decimation in its retail, it's called the urban doom loop. So as you lose commercial receipts, you're eventually start losing commercial tax revenue, and then you end up having to tax residential owners that much more, and then they leave your city. So that piece of the tax receipts is so critical, in terms of how what we're talking about impacts a city's budget. I think the second thing that's important to highlight is when you have people walking down the artery, this commercial corridor at different times of day, because there's offices, there's residential, there's retail. That's a natural way of offering eyes on the street as an alternate form of public safety. And I think large cities like in the Northeast, and I think we all know this is all across the country, very large portions of our budgets go to public safety. And I think there are often better ways than particularly defining that in the context of policing. So I think that in the ability of having many different types of people at all times of day walking through, can help be an antidote to that and hopefully free up portions of the budget for other things that are necessary in a city. And I would say the third part of that is like now, as opposed to inward looking in terms of the budget and what's happening, I think is that outward look is how does a city like Hoboken, how does a city like Houston make itself so undeniably attractive to people to want to come and visit and spend their time and their money in our cities, is this idea of this image and this sense of place. And I think in the case of Hoboken, a lot of our city was built in the 1890s to 1910s. So there's three very dominant architectural styles, and one of them is called Greek Revival, which is, if you think about it, very typically like Brooklyn brownstone style. That's the look of Hoboken. It's so beautiful. It's so unique. Nobody builds like that anymore. So that's something that makes it such that someone wants to come to our city, open up their wallets, open up their purses, stay a while at some of our hotels, and just spend money. So that's why I think that everything that that Nikki presented, I agree with, and those like my financial like underpinnings to everything that she said.
Hoboken is also right across the river from New York City, so I mean, it's just it's just a
Your
path.
backyard, Jason.
Yeah,
So
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 yeah,
get
I grew up not too far from Hoboken, so that's all. It also makes it very attractive too, right?
Mhm.
Just right across the river from downtown. So there, there's that too. But it is a beautiful
so
city that went through gentrification. I guess like 30 years ago now. So, but it's a beautiful city. Yeah.
You might
so
be you might be surprised in this aspect, and thank you, Jason. I'll take your compliments on behalf of my city of 55,000 people. But I would say this is that the gentrification word, I think, is one that is often spoken of obtusely or in ways not directly. And as a city planning commissioner in town, I saw something so stark is the change in the demographics of our city in like racial demographics, but also the household income. And it just blows my mind. So right now we're a city, I hope I'm not off on this, so I remember correctly, we're a city 85% Caucasian and 15% other. And that number is actually not totally different than the case it was 30 or 40 years ago, but it's the household income that's gone zonkers over a short amount of time. I think that idea of gentrification is really important to see it in all its complexities and
For sure.
not just on race, because race can actually cloud certain issues too.
Something. And so it's interesting it can. And Jason, I wanna get your thoughts. One of the things that we talked about back in November around commercial corridors is that how much it represents where you are, right? The community you're in. It's a very
Yeah.
much so a representation of that. It's a representation of like the health of the community, the needs within that community, so on and so forth. And so I know, for instance, your background has been tied to the affordable housing space, and you're supporting developers to build housing. But again, before we get into the financing and some of the different sources we can touch into, how does the what's going on in the commercial corridor affect the affordable housing arena, or just housing? How do the two interact from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, when we talk about affordable housing, we're really talking about a large part of it is workforce housing. So you want to prevent displacement. So you want people who work in these communities to be able to live in these communities. And so when I think of a thriving corridor, it's those characteristics are vibrant small businesses, attractive streetscapes, as well as affordable housing options. And so one of the cool things about LISC is that we provide resources for all of the above. So whenever we lend to a housing developer, there has to be an affordability component there. And we also do small business lending, including restaurants. Oftentimes the communities that we're talking about are food deserts. So with specifically talking about healthy food options. So they all kind of intertwine. And then when you think about creating a thriving corridor, it's that holistic approach that encompasses all of that, and thinking about the neighborhood, but also attaching it to the larger regional area, which is the city as well. So we're thinking third ward area, but also city of Houston.
Yeah.
How do these two entities work together to create a thriving corridor? And definitely affordable housing is a big part of that.
No, you said a few things there that I think were really good things, especially in kind of pivoting to talk about the financing, right? Um, most of what you said when you tied the two together was that the commercial there's a need, right? Someone has a need, and so even though I'm commercial or private market, what need am I feeling, right? What need am I feeling? And so that's something I think everybody here can take away just from what you said, and connecting those two, because when it comes to those alternative financing sources, a lot of times, and Atif, I want to start with you, is
Mhm.
a lot of that funding is sometimes tied to need, right? And what are you doing in the community, correct?
Yeah, I think when it comes to public funding, what I want to do is provide, like, say, 2 or 3 bullet points to help folks contextualize what that particularly means. Because I think, like gentrification, there's like public financing is one of those very kind of clouded terms that can mean many different things. So I want to do that, then I want to answer directly your question, Jason. So the context of public financing. So it includes many, many different things, and namely those are in the form of credits against obligations of something that you have. So that's like a tax responsibility that you have. These are ways to complete the capitalization in the case of a development project, or they're ways to either reduce your expenses or increase your income during the operations phase of a project. So that is essentially the role that public financing fills. And it can be in the form of many things like tax credits, low interest financing, grants, rebates, all of these different forms to do one of those 3 things. And then in terms of scale, why this is so important for developers, emerging developers, and particularly minority developers to think about is that there's $100 billion of our taxpayer money that's used every year in order to be able to deliver these types of programs across the country. The flagship one that is the largest part of the federal budget is the low-income housing tax credit, which reaches about $25 billion of allocation every single year. That is the contextualization of all of this. And I think that when you think about the role of this financing and being able to deliver the strong, stable commercial corridors, it tends to be which of those three levers is the one that's the most critical at the moment to pursue in that particular space. I would say right now, given the extreme economic volatility around small to mid-size and regional banks, it's particularly the ability to complement and fill out a capital stack is the key one. So anywhere where anyone has options for low interest financing, permanently deferred debt, any of those options are the ones I think that are going to be of extreme interest. And what makes this really interesting right now is there's a once in a generation like geyser of money coming towards communities through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So in my state, New Jersey, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority is responsible for creating and deploying these programs in relatively short order. So my prediction is they're probably going to be geared towards that capitalization issue because that's the major stopgap for quality projects in downtowns, I think, across the country.
And I want to before we move past that, I want to make sure we put a point in. You mentioned scale, so we're talking about downtown corridors and scale, and that can be very different from community to community. And so if we're looking at the capital stack for medium, let's say medium to large scale projects, you know, the small to medium scale, which is where most of us live in or want to live in terms of building neighborhood scale, that can be even harder. So that funding, you know, is really important. So I appreciate that. So Nikki, you with the management district, we just talked about a few, you know, I would say federal or maybe even local incentives and funding sources. One of the ones that I think goes unnoticed, at least from my time when I worked for the city of Houston, are our TERS funds and how they're managed and utilized and things like that. If you could give us just a quick primer on like a management district, a TERS, what are they, and what are their purpose together? How do they work together in improving things in the area?
Okay, so a couple things, you know, in a base term, right, the TERS is the financing arm and the management district manages the built infrastructure above the base city standards, right? Just layman's terms. How that works though, the boundaries of a TERS and the boundaries of a management district do not have to be exact. So there can be corridors that the TERS takes ownership of through their partnership with the city. Like Emancipation is under TERS 7, right? It happens to be in, you know, within the boundaries of our management district. But TERSs can have contiguous and non-contiguous boundaries or zones. And those corridors can be very selective in where they're placed around a city or around a district. And the increment that comes from that corridor is directly put into the TERS budget to manage the infrastructure improvements in that particular zone or area. The management district, the way they complement each other is that usually they work hand in hand, right? Or they should. They work in tandem to set vision for the area, but also identify priorities and needs. And so if the management district is charged with bringing in economically viable programs, resources, supporting businesses, making sure that there is a brand and a cadence to the area, the TERS's work complements those elements by bringing in the infrastructure, part of the aesthetic appeal, giving an identity through the built environment of sorts, right? And they work together. So, and they should work together because the management district is funded totally different from the TERS. and they have to make sure that they can actually afford to maintain what's going down, right? Or then you have, impending blight, right? You have a beautiful space for a little while and then nobody can maintain it and then it's horrible. So they work hand in hand because the TERS is able to receive increment that is well above the assessment of the management district that goes into infrastructure in the area. They're able to leverage bond dollars and other federal funding to enhance the vitality of those projects. And then the management district also, our district for sure is an FTA grantee, so we can go after federal dollars as well to support and complement the work of the TERS through infrastructure, built environment, safety improvements that support, long-term maintenance of those improvements that the TERS has put down. So they work in tandem, they're partners. The TERS builds it, finances it, funds it, and the management district maintains it into perpetuity.
Oh, okay. So a couple of things one thing I want to make sure if you could clarify or just touch on, and then another, I kind of want to just make sure we all have a good understanding of. So one, you mentioned increment a few times. And so I want to make sure that everybody understands when you say increment, well, though
That's
their properties are taxed. When she
taxed.
says
It's
this, they are taxed. So meaning
yes,
the money that's collected by these entities, they are putting back into the area in different ways. And I wanted
yes,
to make that distinction because very similar to how Atif told us about public funding, this again is still funding that's driven by your tax dollars. So again,
absolutely.
it's another source of funds that we overlook at times that we are already putting money in the pot to, right? So that's something I want to make sure clear of. But the other thing that I want to touch on, we talked about how some of those public funds could be used.
Mhm.
Uh, and you talked about how you guys maintain infrastructure, but in terms of development, we want the infrastructure that's helpful to us in knowing what's going on and building aligning our development, goals with those types of things. And sometimes that lowers costs. That's good, but there are other ways that the TERS helps developers, at least from my perspective. So,
Absolutely.
what way do you see TERS is being used as part of the development capital?
So the TERS is tax increment reinvestment zones. Just so we can clarify that money is being reinvested back into the community. But every TERS has programs that they develop and put on the ground, right? So you have 380 programs, which again are curated to the area, right? They have to be approved, of course, by the city and things like that. But those programs are developed by the agency and then implemented through partnership with developers. There's also, and you'll hear the terms developer reimbursements. You'll hear all kinds of things. They're called several different things, but these are specific programs that are designed to support all scale, right? All types of developments in the area, but it's catered to the needs of that particular area. So with all the TERS we have in our city, each TERS may have a different 380 focus. At one point, our city had the Downtown Living Initiative, which was to bring in residents into the downtown area because after 5 o'clock, downtown was dead, right? And so there was a premium put on each door built downtown and was an incentive to developers to build at scale or to build multi-family housing downtown to populate the area so that there could be a nighttime economy. And so those types of programs or initiatives are put in place based on the needs of the area. So whatever the deficit is, those dollars can be directed to support filling that gap. Another opportunity for the funding is local matches, right? So if there is an opportunity for an area or a district or a TERS to pursue a federal fund or federal dollars, like Atif mentioned the infrastructure bill. If there are opportunities to pursue dollars, the TERS can leverage the increment or the revenue that is collected as a local share to make sure that we are investing our dollars back into the major ask because they want to see that you have skin in the game. And so those dollars can be leveraged and earmarked for those as well. And then, like I mentioned, the bond funding for, projects that may be, you may have 50% of it, but you need the other 50, right? You can actually, do infrastructure bonds to see that projects get completed. So there's so many ways to navigate the use of those funds. I think sometimes, building that capital stack is definitely the most creative part, I think, of the development piece on the financing side, because you want to make sure that you have viable partners, you have structured financing mechanisms in place so that the deal can go through, and then you can ultimately build what it is you have communicated, right, to the community you've envisioned, and that it actually produces the result that you intended it to produce. So it's a creative space. But I think having organizations that are open, that are able to walk you through certain processes, that have good relationships with city leadership, state leadership, and then federal government, allows you to leverage that in a way where, whether you're small scale development, mid-size, or large scale development, you have the tools you need to make the appropriate decisions and get, the appropriate infrastructure down to support what you need.
I like what you guys are doing right now with just putting money out, like for grant, like in a grant form, in a sense. So you guys are doing, demolition grants or beautification grants, in a sense. So these are things to improve the property along the corridors, or in some cases where we have blighted properties, tear it down, get rid of it, and it becomes a lot or a space that maybe we can use in another way. But at least it's not an eyesore or attracting anything. So I think that even though it's a small thing, it's still something I don't have to pay for necessarily.
Right. And I think, a lot of our property owners are out of state, right? And so they hold property and they don't necessarily know what's going on with it until, if they don't have a property manager. So they'll get a letter in the mail and they don't know that a tree is falling down, or, the house is,
Right.
Not what it used to be. So, I think the support of a management district, because we have a field services team that goes out and drives these corridors to identify those properties and communicates with us, hey, this is what's happening here. This is, we've reached out to this person so that we can get ahead of some of these things. But, there's only, there are limitations to what we can do, but I think every little bit helps. And when you can, shave off 10 grand off of a demo project, that's 10 grand that you
Right.
can put somewhere else. So
Somewhere, yeah. So we talked a little bit about public, and sources there. We talked, this is, I would call, more local or regional funding that's there and it's available, and they have their different nuances that we can touch on here in a few. But Jason, you mentioned with the LISC is a CDFI, and just, for those that, again, maybe not familiar with the acronym, if you can kind of unpack a CDFI and kind of what you guys do in that role. But also, I think I want to talk a little bit about, if you can share a little bit about resources that are sometimes available in untraditional ways. And so, in terms of like our experience with the Seed Academy, sometimes if there's funding tied to programs. So if you could, kind of give us a little bit of background there in terms of funding sources.
Sure. Sure. So CDFI stands for Community Development Financial Institution. And so we're similar to a bank, but a nonprofit. And anytime we lend money, there has to be a community development component. So in terms of lending money for housing, there needs to be affordability component. If we're doing commercial lending, there needs to be some sort of social impact. If you're building a commercial space, how are you giving back to the community? Are you building an incubator in that commercial space where you're creating more entrepreneurs from the community? So anything we do is community development oriented. And so there's a lending side, and then we're also intermediary. So we really do community developments. We plug in resources into community in a strategic way. So case in point, Jason's talking about the Seed Academy, which is how we come to know each other, or how we met. And the Seed Academy is an initiative to help emerging developers build capacity. And Courtney's on this call and from Grow America, and we do this. The Seed Academy is actually their product, and they partner with us to launch this program here in Houston. But so with the SEED Academy, which stands for Supporting Empowered Immersion Developers, we have 25 developers that are in have different phases of it, or different experience levels, and had an in-person intense training class to train developers on financing for multifamily affordable. Most of the developers were already developing single family homes, some duplexes, but teaching developers how to build a capital stack for multifamily. And so in doing that, we're helping developers build capacity, but also available at the end of this program, at the end of the training program, is grant dollars. So it's actually called a forgivable loan to give developers for pre-development capital. And we've already deployed, I think, about $60,000 to different developers in pre-development capital. So for soft costs, so architectural fees, all environmental studies. So that's a way to get financing, an alternative way to get financing for your project, but while also building capacity and creating more developers in the community. So that's a very good example of what LISC does and how we operate in the community.
Thanks. So I think that, and hopefully afterwards, I have a few more things. Hopefully afterwards, y'all have time. If folks have some questions to follow up, we can touch on. But the takeaway, at least in listening to you guys, at least from my perspective, is that public, CDFI, TERS, management district relationship, all of these things were different funding sources, but they were funding sources they are all tied to some need in the neighborhood that we have to solve in some way, right? And they all have a different way that we can use them. And so we touched on some of those things, but one thing we didn't touch on that I like to kind of jump into is, how do we get to those types of funds? A lot of times when we talk about public dollars, it seems like this big onerous machine that we have to go through to get a few bucks, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so same thing with CDFIs. Nobody's marketing this stuff. We don't see, CDFIs aren't out in the market, kind of marketing the same way we're doing.
They're not on TikTok.
Yeah, they're not on TikTok or whatever the case is. And same thing, Nikki, the management district, this is y'all have meetings every month, right? And yeah, the meetings I go to, I can count on one hand how many other neighbors, developers, or whomever are there. And so you guys, I'll let, you guys can start, whoever wants to start. How do we actually access these dollars? How do we get to these dollars?
I guess I'll go first.
Yeah.
Relationships. That's how everything happens. It's relationships. If you're attending a meeting and you see something viable and beneficial, share it with the next person. I think we suffer a lot from the gatekeeping issue, because if I know, I can use it for me, but it doesn't necessarily benefit you because you may or may not be able to use the tool. Right? It's almost it's like that tool shed that your grandfather has in the backyard that he used to use everything in there, but now he don't do nothing and it just sit there. That's how we are gatekeeping all the good stuff that can make our communities better. But with everything, relationships are the access code. That's the cheat code to everything that we're trying to do. But we have to get outside of ourselves and get out of this territorial mindset of this is something that I wanted to do 20 years ago, and the youngsters are coming in trying to do what I want to do, and it's so much, right? So many things. I can go down a rabbit hole, but I will not. But the goal is to establish. Oh no, I will not. The goal is to establish good, solid relationships with people who are like-minded, much like you're doing here, and then figure out how to move in unison. Right? There's power in numbers and there's power in a unified vision. And so to access this stuff, show up, like people are showing up here today, show up to city council, set a meeting with the, economic development officer at the city, right? Ask questions, but relationships.
I don't think people realize that you can do that. That if you have something you're trying to do, that you can reach out to that department and make an appointment and go talk to them, and they'll be like, hey, this is, they'll help you, so to speak.
So if you have a toothache, you can't call the dentist. Whatever need you have, you can call and get help. And I think that's where we miss the mark, because we are so hyper independent. We can find anything and everything on the internet. But showing up, come in person, right? As much as I love the virtual space and I love, this remote life, sometimes showing up makes a difference in what you have access to. And we talk about seats at the table and all those kind of stuff, all kind of things. You don't sit in a chair when you're, across the waters and you're just saying, oh, I'll just go online. No, show up, show your face, because there are people in that room that may not even do anything online. They're a handshake and a conversation person, and that's the person you need to get to.
Right, you're right.
So relationships and show up.
Atif, I see you shaking your head, so I'm assuming you agree with the relationships. Anything to add to that, or anything, especially from your experience in putting together Readers, you're making it easier. You made it easier for us to access and kind of navigate. Can you speak to that? Like, how do we get to those funds? What problems did you see that you felt like you needed to solve for developers?
And you're muted, by the way.
Oh yeah, you're muted.
Sorry, that's so 2020 of me. So, right in the beginning of the pandemic. Relationships are, I believe, is absolutely the centerpiece of being able to access this. I think for me, there's, in addition, two issues that are very fascinating that I think tie into relationships. One of them is the information itself and being able to get it. And I think relationships are one way. The other one is to think about how that can effectively be put together through the power of data and machine learning. So we're just in the first inning of that overall, and we're like not even in the first inning of that when it comes to financial services. So in the context of Redis, we're a first generation version of that type of a product. So I think the ability to leverage data sources like that for your benefit to be able to get multiples of returns on your time, which is your most precious resource, is absolutely something to do to really supercharge and complement the relationships that you have. So right now we've taken the software offline because of the process of the sale. But what you can do is contact me. I'll add my email address in the chat, and then when we're back online in a couple of weeks as part of this consulting company, that is an avenue where I can provide you all those resources through the context of a full service consulting company. So I think that aspect is one thing that is to think about in relations to complementing the relationships. And I think the other way to think about it is the power of narrative. And I think if you think about it, one example I just jokingly added, TikTok, the reason why that software has become the lightning rod for political issues in Washington, D.C., is because of the power of the narrative, which has far predated TikTok, but the ability to tell that story and to be so viral and so engaging is so important. So I think for me, what I found has been really valuable is the one thing that I've built and taken advantage of is a podcast. So I started the American Building podcast. We have about 15,000 listeners now. And that provides an avenue for me to tell the story of really amazing developers that just don't get in the newspaper, don't get in the Commercial Observer or the Wall Street Journal or any design magazine. And I think that the ability to have your story out there in the world is this self-fulfilling prophecy where then the truth that you tell becomes true simply because it's there. So I think that those two aspects are what I think are really supercharged relationships, data to really speed up your time and when you're building those relationships, and the narrative in order to completely catapult your story. So people aren't just hearing about your story in Houston, but they should be hearing about your story in Hoboken and everywhere else in between too.
Yeah.
That's the two things I'd say.
No, I think that's very, very powerful. It's almost like we have to begin using data and telling our story so that, the partners and people around us, you know, they can support us in a sense, right? They know what's going on. So it's especially same thing with those relationships, the communication, the information we're sharing with them about our struggles, our accomplishments, is all data for them, right? Um, Jason, so kind of same thing. If you could, you know, how do we, you know, a CDFI or LISC, for instance, has money, but I can probably go call 5 different people right now and ask them, hey, did you know you can go get some funds for your project from over there? They're gonna say, I don't even know who they are. So same thing, you know, we're talking about these different funding sources, but they're so mysterious, right? At times. So for a lot of people that are in this space, especially the emerging folks, even existing folks have been really focusing on our space. You know, how do we plug in? What does it look like to work with, you know, LISC or CDFI, for example?
Yeah, I think part of it is incumbent on us, right? That's why I'm on this call. That's why I always participate whenever there's the opportunity to participate in a panel discussion and talk about what LISC has to offer. I do that because part of it is us here in LISC Houston really making people aware of the resources that we have. For example, Mackenzie Scott gave LISC $50 million for Black development, Black developers specifically to develop in urban areas, right? So so we have funding available, but part of it is incumbent on us to get the word out, and also relationships. So understanding when you're looking for financing, where to go. So as a lender, LISC really stands out on the pre-development side because you're not going to be able to go to most banks and get a pre-development loan. So that's really where we stand out. And also when you mentioned narrative, we also really that's really important for us, right? So we understand that there may be some credit issues or new developer, but what's the narrative? What type of social impact will this project have? So that's also very important for us as a CDFI. So everybody on this call, I mean, that's part of it. Going out there seeking information because we're not gonna advertise, we're not gonna have commercials. I mean, that's just not it's not what it is. So part of it, like I said, is me raising the awareness and profile of LISC in Houston, because in other markets, LISC is more known, right? In New York, DC, on the East Coast, but in Houston, not as much. So that's definitely one of my missions. But there is money out here, you know, there is money out here for sure. And you know, and moving forward, we actually, in terms of commercial corridor, we actually have Houston is slated to be next. We already launched in 12 cities, so community economic inclusion, community center economic inclusion. So it's basically a district plan that connects a hyper local neighborhood with the city. We've launched it in 12 markets in LA, Bay Area, San Diego, Atlanta, DC, and Houston's next. We actually have a call about it, I think, next week. So that'll be a program or initiative that will be launched, and there'll be some dollars behind that. I'll include a link to some information in the chat and share with everyone. But so we have a newsletter. I'll also include that link. So just if you keep in touch with what we're doing, we do talk about some initiatives that come out. But it's not something that you're going to really see advertised on a large scale.
Right, you got to be in the smoke-filled room, so to speak, in the know.
Yeah.
So, no, I think that really good takeaway is the narrative. So I appreciate you guys helping us, you know, tell and spread our narrative. So our real estate council, you know, the information that you guys share, we share it, right? We share with our folks. A lot of folks don't even know that, you know, we're structured more like a membership organization, right? And so with that, for us, the sharing of the information and the narrative is so important. We believe that, you know, everything speeds up with understanding. And so if we're all on the same page, we can move a little bit faster. We're having this conversation today because we really feel like, getting access to capital is just that. It's really finding good partners and understanding how to utilize information. And so we connect and have like different networking events, different technical assistance workshops where we have developers that are, actively doing things right here in the area, partnering with, new developers or sharing information or giving them information on their projects. So, I think all that happens in our space. So it's good, like the feedback you guys are giving us lets us know we're doing some things right, but this information is very helpful. And so
Mhm.
what I'll ask is if you guys, it's 12:27. If you guys can hold back for a few, I'm gonna stop the recording, and I'll open up the call for those that are here, if they have different questions and things like that. And before I do that, I have one kind of closing question. And then I'd like for you, if you could, leave us with something that you feel like we should maybe part with or take away. If you don't have anything, that's fine, just answer the question. But if you do have something that we should take away, a
Mhm.
last parting thing in terms of considering alternative financing or funding sources for our projects, please share. And so what I want to know is the way we source and stack our capital stacks changing? If so, how is that changing?
Oh God, that's one big behemoth of a question.
So
I'll
many. Like,
I'll take my first stab at it.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I think my answer to that question would be absolutely. The way that capital stacks are defined and built is absolutely changing. I think that there's probably three things that I would highlight as the issues at play that help to give a contextualization of what that will become for each of you. I think the first one to highlight is the structural inequities during the risk mitigation process for private lenders and banks all across the country that make it systemically difficult for emerging slash women slash minority developers to access capital. And oftentimes it has to do with the biggest one is net worth and multiples of the loan that's being asked. So I think that is like structural issue one. And I think structural issue two is the fact that interest rates are the highest they've ever been for millennials. Any millennial that's on this call, I've never seen those numbers ever in my career. So I think that the reality that debt simply build and they will come and you'll be saved by your exit cap rate. Those things just don't exist anymore because of that interest rate. I think it's really changing a lot of what that means. And I think the third one is as the United States has become more and more economic stratified, particularly at the top, there's a 5% of America which has a lot of money, a lot of money. And I think that those types of folks are looking for alternative ways to invest their money. So that allows a particular avenue to get other people into capital stacks. I think opportunity zones are the best example of that as a capital source. So I'd say those are like the three like things that are the mix as to why I would say yes, the capital stacks are absolutely changing.
Okay. Appreciate that. That's very insightful, especially around the inequities in the financing. I'm a big on that. Big on that. Nikki, you wanna take a stab? It is the way capital going, but changing, if so, how? But ultimately, if you could just leave us with a takeaway from this conversation.
Well, I agree 100% with Atif. I think, we have to see money as a tool and figure out what tools will make our desired projects or experience a bit easier, right? How do we put that formula together to meet the social need, the profitability of the actual development, the housing need? What needs are we feeling, and make sure that that formula is complemented by the appropriate dollars, right?
Mm.
You have philanthropic dollars that are, people don't talk about, but there are people who just want people to have homes, right? And they'll be willing to figure out how to support some of those things. So I think getting creative and understanding what the dynamic of a capital stack really is, how to make sure that your story is compelling enough and that you have credibility to be able to bring to life the story that you're telling, right? Or to add more viability to it. I'll leave you with this. Ask questions. Get in rooms that you've not previously entered and begin to align yourself with people who are either doing what you're doing, have a desire to do what you do, and are willing to share information. If you see that someone is not comfortable sharing, move on to the next place, right? Don't press them because, again, that is their mode. And you don't want to become discouraged because someone's not sharing with you information that you can get from the next willing source. So show up, ask questions, and don't be afraid to move around the room, right? To move around the space. There's room for everybody. There's enough money for everybody. And so, don't feel that you have to sit in one pond in order to be fed. And so I would say, get out, do things, ask questions.
Jason, if you could, same thing, how do you see our capital stacks changing? If you have any, insight there on what you're seeing in supporting developers, but, ultimately, any takeaways that you feel like we should take home with us in closing out this discussion?
For sure. I agree with both what Nikki and Atif said. Same thing. I mean, we're actually looking at raising a fund to help buy down rates because we know that that interest rates are very high and deals aren't. It's hard to make deals pencil out. So I know when we had our meeting in terms of strategic outlook funding for this year, that's one of the pools of funding we're looking to raise is specifically for that purpose. There's also LISC has some strategic investment funds that are impact investment dollars. So investors are not looking for as large a return, so they're kind of more philanthropic dollars to make a deal work. We don't have a fund specifically for Houston. Could be in the future, but we have some of those funds in other cities specifically for that reason. So I agree with what everybody says. So I put the link to the newsletter so you can stay in touch with us, and if anything that we have available, we always would post it in our newsletter. And in terms of a takeaway, I mean, I think just do whatever everybody on this call is on the right path, on the right trajectory. I mean, doing the work, seeking information, knowledge, and with hopping on webinars or calls like this, you're going to get more information than you had before. And then the next part is executing, right? So applying that knowledge that you have is that important piece too. And I shouldn't say taking advantage, but leveraging people who are here to help you and want to see you take advantage of the opportunity. That's also important. And because when you ask, you need to be specific in your ask. And when you have someone who wants to help you, I think they will do that. So that would be, my takeaway. Just keep doing what you're doing, and it'll come.
Man, I feel like I reached out to you guys to share some different uh, sources of money outside of banks, outside of private money. We're notorious for going after private money because we, feel like it's easier money, so to speak. But you guys have shared, a bucket list of information and sources. And so, I know it's going to take us time to sort through it and, really decipher and digest it. But for us, that was the point. I appreciate you guys participating in this fireside chat on connecting corridors. And so we'll share this information, probably type it up or put it together in a way that our folks can go and digest it themselves. And so hopefully here soon, you guys can join us, become a supporter, and help us in our efforts to revitalize emancipation and other corridors like it here in Houston and with our partners across the country. So again, thank you again for supporting our Do the Things That Matter campaign. I'm Jason Hyman with Third World Real Estate Council. and we'll talk soon.